All right. All right, here we go. We're back. Not sure what happened, cool kids. Sometimes technology goes, works against us. We haven't had a guest on here in a while, so it may have been on my part, but you know what? I think the enemy doesn't want you to know what's about to be shared. We're just going to go with that one. Hey, Chris, thank you for hanging on with us and hanging tight. Appreciate you, thank you for
Yeah,
your patience.
absolutely.
Hey, let's just continue right we're on. If they want to go catch the first part of the last 5-10 minutes you said, let's catch that. We'll just keep on where we were going with it.
Johnny, I got to tell you a funny story based on this and the fact that we both love Zig. The very first time I ever met Zig, I had asked him to come on a conference call for an hour. I was doing the Jim Rohn 1-year leadership program, and I asked him to come on a call and talk about sales. So it was the month we were talking about sales, and Zig came on, did an hour long, and the recording didn't come out. And I thought, how in the world do I get the world's greatest, most famous, successful motivational speaker back again? The guy's as busy as they get. How do I get him back again? So I sent a message over to Tom, and Zig got right back on the phone call. And that time the recording worked, and we were able to get it as part of the Jim Rohn 1-year success plan. But sometimes stuff happens. That's part of life.
Yeah, you just roll with it, right?
Yep.
Awesome, man. I do have a couple of questions since you were talking about, we're getting ready, we're gearing up for this Christian entrepreneurs public speaking workshop. And if anybody knows anything about Christian entrepreneurship and public speaking, it would be you. Can you share with us a little bit about what it means to really own your voice and let your voice be heard in the marketplace?
Sure. All of life is about communication. People say, oh, well, the big three arguments or the big three problems in marriage are money, sex, and power. No, it's how you communicate about money, sex, and power. Communication is the root. I mean, if you think about communication, its base form is it's two people and what's going on inside of one person, and there's something going on inside of the other person, and you have to be able to get this out and over to this person, and that's communication. And it's vocal, it's tone, it's facial, it's all that kind of stuff. And so if you are a Christian professional, or anybody, but specifically as a Christian professional, you have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn to be able to communicate with employees, with potential vendors, with potential customers and clients. All of those people, you have to be able to communicate. But one of the things is, you said their unique brand or their voice or whatever. At the end of podcasts, regularly you get asked the question, is there one final piece of advice you'd give to everybody? And it's a piece of advice that I got. I was 22 years old. I went to a pastor's conference, and I was in Edmonton, Alberta, and it was during one of the breaks. And there's like 500 people out there, and you're all kind of sitting there with your coffee, like you don't know anybody. So you're kind of just sitting there. And I turned around. It was about 11 in the morning. It was the mid-morning break. I turn around and I come face to face with these two women. One was about 55 and the other was about 30. Never met him before, never met him since, never kept in contact with him, nothing. I turn around and kind of just like bumped into him right there. And the younger woman goes like this.
Yeah.
And the older woman looks at her, looks at me, looks at her, looks at me, looks at her and goes, is that him? And she goes, and the older woman says, this probably seems really weird to you, but in the middle of the night last night at 2 a.m, my daughter woke me up in the hotel room, shaking me, going, I just had the craziest vision. I saw this man in my dream, and God told me to tell him something. And so when she saw me, apparently my face had appeared in her dream, and she was supposed to tell me something. So the woman, and it ends up, it was a mother and a daughter. And the mother says to me, so apparently you're the person. And she says to her daughter, tell him. And she says, I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo.
Ooh.
That was it. That was 37 years ago. And I still think about that many times a week. It's the number one piece of advice I give to people. and even more specifically, business people, and even more specifically, Christian business people, and even more specifically, speakers. You have to be a voice, not an echo. The problem with most of what's going on in personal development now and professional development is it's all just everybody echoing everybody else. It's the same bit of advice. It's the same, worn out wisdom. And, a guy gets fired from his job and now all of a sudden he's a coach and a speaker. And, and he's like, well, what do I do? Well, I'll read a John Maxwell book and I'll teach that. Or I'll read a Zig Ziglar book and I'll teach that. We don't need more regurgitation. We need thought leaders. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Mark Sanborn, but he's a very well-known speaker for the last 40 years, Christian guy out of Denver.
Yes.
And he said, you know what the problem is with thought leaders? Most thought leaders? Most of them don't think. Most of them don't think. Mark does something every day. He's done it for 30 or 40 years now. Every single day, he takes 15 minutes out of his day. He sits down with a pen, a legal pad, and a cup of coffee, and he spends 15 minutes. That's it. He doesn't go 30, doesn't go 10. He goes 15 minutes, and all he does is write ideas, writes what he's thinking, and just makes notes. And it constantly keeps his brain thinking about new things and creating. And so what I would tell people is make sure you know yourself before you try to go become somebody else. I'll give you a good example of that. People will regularly ask me, what was it like to work? What was the biggest lesson you learned working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar? And I always say, to be myself. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, Zig and Jim were the highest echelon of the speaking world. They were friends, they were colleagues, they were just about the same age, and they were and still are legends in the industry. But you could not have picked two different men than Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn. Zig was loud and then quiet, and he'd march all over the stage, and he'd pump his fist and he'd pump that well, and then he'd go to the front of the stage, he'd get down on a knee and he'd whisper to you. He was dynamic on stage, he was dynamic off stage. And then you have Jim Rohn, a quiet introvert, and he stayed behind the lectern. He didn't go out. He very, very rarely wandered out. And we always used to joke, this is Jim, right? So Jim's giving his speech and he's behind his lectern. And we knew Jim was getting excited when he'd do this. He'd say, write this down. And we're like, whoa, Jim just took his glasses off. And so what I realized was you can become the highest levels of an industry and become two completely different people. It wasn't their personality, it was them. And so what I realized as a young man working with them, because I worked with them when I was between 36 and 43 or something like that, I realized I didn't need to be Zig Ziglar and I didn't need to be Jim Rohn. I needed to be Chris Widner. I needed to be a voice and not an echo.
Man, that is spot on. That is spot on. It reminds me of the story whenever somebody says, I'm going to be the next Zig Ziglar. And Zig Ziglar said, that's a horrible idea.
And they try to get the accent down and they try to add an A to every word,
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we talk about. We talk about how this whole Childlike Faith podcast is powered by Zig Ziglar. And when we talk about it's powered by Zig Ziglar, we're just simply meaning his philosophy.
Yeah.
Of you can have everything in life you want if you'll simply help enough other people get what they want. And there's 5 questions built into that quote, and we unpack those individually for everybody because it's different. Everybody has their own voice. Everybody's walked a different path. Everybody's had a different experience.
The teacher of it has a different voice. So it's you could take 5 people to teach Zig's principles, and if they're just teaching Zig stuff, well, Zig used to say this, and Zig used to say that, and Zig, you're just regurgitating. But if you say, here's the principle Zig taught, now let me tell you how this has affected my life and what I've been thinking about this. Now you're creating, now you're being a voice, not just an echo.
Yes, yeah. And what we do is we take that and we translate it into what childlike faith means.
Yeah.
And what is it for everybody? And everyone I've coached, every place I've spoke with, it's different. It's never the same message. It's the same outline, the same framework, just a different outcome every now and then. Chris, in your experience, how does mastering, and I hate to use that word mastering because I don't think we ever really master something if we're continuously improving, but in getting better in public speaking, how does that help the entrepreneur to not just grow their business, but to also multiply their impact in the marketplace?
Well, your ability to communicate, whether it's one-on-one or it's on a stage with 25,000 people, it's your ability to transfer what's going on inside your brain and heart over to somebody else, right? If somebody comes in, and it's as simple as you're a waiter at a restaurant. Somebody comes in and goes, how's the tacos? Well, I don't know. I haven't had them. I just started here, a week ago, and I haven't had the tacos. Oh, well, what about the burritos? Well, I'm lactose intolerant, and there's so much cheese in it, I haven't eaten any, and blah blah. You're not communicating anything,
Yeah.
or you're a salesman, and they're like, well, tell me, how fast does the car go? Oh, I don't know. I hear they're pretty fast. You have to master it yourself and be able to learn to communicate that. You ask one salesman, tell me a little bit about the car, and he'll give you everything you need to know. How fast it goes, what the speed 0 to 60 is, how many passengers it can hold, what the trunk space is like, all the upgrades and the radio and the wheels and blah, blah, blah. Who are you going to buy the car from? One who goes, well, I've never really test drove this car, but I hear they're great. Or the guy that gives you and communicates in an effective way all the information. So the top skill that you need to achieve in your business is learning how to communicate, and communicate clearly and concisely and movingly.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people in our community, but because of the response that I'm getting from these social media posts and some of these social media lives that we do, they feel called to speak, but they just don't feel qualified. And a lot of times they're waiting for the right moment, or they're waiting to get it down just pat and perfect before they step out on stage or speak out on a social media live. And what do you say to that perfectionism thing that's masquerading around in their lives?
Well, nobody's perfect. Zig wasn't perfect. Jim wasn't perfect. I'm not perfect. Johnny's not perfect. So you can get rid of that. What I would say is, and I'll tell you a little story about this. Everybody is a master of something.
Agreed.
And I remember it was the early 90s. I was speaking in Seattle, and I gave a 30-minute speech, no notes. This guy comes up to me and he says, how in the world can you give a speech for 30 minutes with no notes? And I said, you could.
Uh-huh.
And I still actually had the microphone in my hand. It was a handheld microphone. And he goes, oh, I could never give a speech for 30 minutes in with no notes. And I said, really? I said, what do you do for a living? He said, I'm an engineer at Boeing. And I said, oh, what are you working on? Now, this is how long ago it was, because this airplane's been out for a long time now. He said, I'm the wing designer on a 740, on the new 777. I'm the wing designer and engineer. And I said, so let me ask you this. How long you been there? 15 years. How long you been in aeronautical design? 28 years. Okay, let me ask you this. If I handed you this microphone right now, and maybe I even give you 30 seconds just to collect your thoughts, could you give me 30 minutes on how an airplane wing works and the dynamics of it and how to design it in order to capture the natural aerodynamics and all that kind of stuff? And he goes, oh, yeah, sure, I could do that. And I said, that's all I do. I don't talk about things I don't know about. I talk about things that I know everything about, or know, as a world-class level. I turned down a speech the other day on LinkedIn. This guy reached out to me, and it was some sort of an AI conference. And I just wrote back to him. I said, sir, I said, I'm not nearly expert enough to be able to speak articulately on this. I said, I think you should probably find somebody who would be better for your audience. And this guy was shocked that I turned him down, not in a bad way, in a good way. He's like, thank you so much for your integrity. And he's like, I just have always admired you and seen your stuff on LinkedIn. I know you're a world-class speaker. And I said, yeah, but there's guys that would deliver. There's guys you've never heard of before that will deliver 10 times the speech that I will. And your audience will be happy. You'll be happy. And the speaker will be happy. If I do it for you, I won't be happy because I'm going to do a terrible job. You won't be happy because you put me on stage in front of your people, and they won't be happy because they got nothing out of it. And so finding your specific voice, your specific message, the thing that you are an expert on, and then build your business around that.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And this whole childlike faith podcast today just happens to be FaithUr Fears Friday. And so I want to talk about fear in just a moment. And because really you've spoken to audiences all over the world. Uh, what fears did you personally have to overcome back when you first started, and how can our cool kids, I call that's what our viewers are called, the cool kids club, how can they do that in their life and in their business?
Well, I will start out by being completely candid, and that is I've never been afraid of speaking. I've been talking since I came out of the womb, and in fact, when I got older, my mother asked me. She said, "People pay you to do what I told you to stop," and I go, "Yeah, pretty much." And when I was in the third grade, my mom got me a Mr. Microphone. And for those of you who are too young, a Mr. Microphone was a microphone that tied into your local FM station, like up at like 105.9 or something. And so you could have a microphone and it would come out your speakers of your radio. And it was like the worst thing my mother ever bought for me. But remember in high school when you'd go to homeroom and the buzzer would buzz and you'd all sit down and then the voice came over the thing, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
And then today's lunch is fish sticks and tater tots. And I did that my junior and senior year. That was me. I did college basketball. When I transferred to a bigger college, I ended up being the in-house college basketball announcer. I've done drive time radio, TV shows. I've never had a problem with. It's always come naturally to me. So I always feel like I kind of need to say that before I give some advice. In fact, I remember one time it was, at the time, it was the biggest speech I'd ever given. It was 17,500 people in Rupp Arena in Lexington, Kentucky, named after the legendary University of Kentucky basketball coach. I was more in awe of all the basketball banners across the rafters than I were there with 17,000 people in there. And in these big conferences, they have a manager who walks with you and they got a clipboard and they got headphones on and little mic pieces and the CEO was giving my introduction, literally, our next speaker, Chris Widner, blah, 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 blah. And I had the woman who was managing me and she was going to pull the curtain for me to go. And I looked at her and I went, I don't think I can do this. There's too many people out there. And she went like this, are you kidding me? And I go, oh no, I'll be fine. And they called my name and I went out. So the things that I'm giving you now are things that I've worked with people, and you have too, I'm sure, Johnny, but I've always been a natural at it and I've never been afraid. I've always kind of been the more the merrier type of person. But I would say is what I just talked about. Number one, know your stuff. Know your stuff. You've got to know it so that if you lose your place, you can pick up somewhere. You need to know it cold. And whether that means memorizing a speech, which I wouldn't recommend, that's more old school, but knowing an outline. If you said to me right now, start at the third point of your speech, I could start. I've got my stories. I've got my points. I've got my quotes. I've got okay, now go to the first one. And I could start there and, now do your conclusion. I've built it. I've mastered it. I know the information and I can, it's all plug and play at this point. Most people are afraid of speaking because they're afraid they're going to look stupid. That's the number one reason. Well, if you're the smartest guy in the room on that topic, you're never going to look stupid. And the second point that I would tell you, especially for those of you who are not professional speakers at this point, nobody expects you to be good. And you need to understand that. So if somebody pays me $40,000 and I come in, they expect me to be good, because I'm a highly paid professional speaker. They expect me to be good. So now you got 500 salespeople from XYZ organization, and they bring in a professional speaker. They expect that speaker to be good. But if they're calling in Bob from the accounting department, and Bob gets up there and he starts talking, nobody expects him to be Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
But there was a research project that Jerry Seinfeld turned into a little joke in his comedy routine. The research project found out that the average person is more afraid of public speaking than dying. And so Jerry Seinfeld says that means the next time you're at a funeral, most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So let's translate into, you've now been asked to give a talk at the local Rotary Club, or you've been asked to give a talk at your company, or, whatever, your network marketing company, whatever. First thing you have to understand to alleviate your fear is nobody expects you to be good.
Yeah.
They are not sitting there going, well, I can't believe Bob from accounting is such a terrible public speaker. No, they're sitting there going, man, I'm glad they chose Bob and not me. right? They're glad it's you up there. They're glad it's not them up there. And so just understanding that you're the smartest guy in the room on this topic and nobody's expecting you to be good, and you lower those levels of expectation. If you think about this, they do it in political debates all the time. In the run up to the debate, they're like, well, candidate A is not feeling very well, and he's been really busy, and I don't know how much he's gotten to study. Oh, hogwash. He's been studying for 2 weeks, in a closet with 14 of his friends. He knows but they lower the expectations. Oh, I've heard he had a cold and he didn't get a chance. And then you go, wow, he was great tonight. And I think the same thing is true when you walk out on stage, unless you're a professional speaker. If you can come at it and understand these people, man, if you can string a few sentences together, you're going to look like a rock star. But know your stuff, practice your stuff. When I work with people who want to become better speakers, I have them send me videos, and I'll say, shoot me a 15-minute video, put your phone on the side, give me 15 minutes of your best stuff, and let's talk about it. And there's techniques and things like that. You don't just want to talk like this in the same tone of voice, just like that. I mean, that's brainless, right? You don't want to put your hands way down at your side so that you look like you don't have any confidence at all. You want to keep them up here and strong and powerful. You want to throw your shoulders back. There's lots of techniques and tricks and things like that. Making sure that you can walk a little bit and talk a little bit, and that you've got some inflection and those kinds of things. But what's always going to save the day is knowing your stuff. It's always going to save the day.
Yeah. I've recently pivoted in my speaking career to emceeing events.
Yeah.
I like to bring a lot of fun. I like to bring a lot of energy. And I always tell my clients that if you'll take that Venn diagram, what you do, why you do it, and how you do it, right in the middle, people call that the purpose or your calling.
Yeah.
I call it the fun zone. It's the one thing you do the absolute best at with the least amount of effort.
Yeah.
And you're spot on. Know what you're doing. Recently emceed an event for Jacob Salem's book launch where Tom Ziegler was the keynote speaker.
I know Jacob, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and Jacob, he was on here earlier. And it was funny because there was a speaker slot that opened up, and he goes, "Hey, can you fill in that speaker slot?" It was a 15-minute slot. I was like, "Let's go."
Yeah.
Let's go. I just rolled into the routine. No, didn't think about it. We just went. We had fun. We engaged the audience. We got some laughs. We got some participation. And you're just sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. You talked about that earlier, right? The knowledge is knowing that a tomato's a fruit, right? Wisdom is knowing not to put it in the fruit salad.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some structural things that you can do to your speech. I got started speech writing and speech coaching when my best friend ran for governor, and he asked me to write his stump speech. So I sat down with a couple people, and one of the things that we did with his speech was we created what I call an emotional roller coaster. And that means that throughout the speech, and we literally even had little emojis before there were emojis. We wrote our own little emojis, and you want them to laugh sometimes. Yeah. You want them to cry sometimes. You want them to lean in and be serious and thoughtful sometimes. You want them, of course, in a political thing, you want them to clap line or whatever. And so we crafted this speech so that we constantly cycled them through that. And so we do a little draw happy face. That means they're going to laugh there. And then we do a little hand. That means they're going to clap there. And then we do a sad face. That means they're touched by a story of something that went wrong. And we would create this so we were constantly cycling them through their emotions, because statistics tell us that only the top 0.5% of speakers can keep somebody's attention for 21 minutes or more. That because eventually people just start thinking about, did I leave the oven on? When is my report due? But if you can craft your speech in such a way that 1 minute you're laughing, then the next minute you're serious, your brain is engaging constantly. There's a part of your brain called the Broca, and the Broca decides whether or not you need to pay attention or not. So as you're driving home for the 400th time from your office, you don't notice most everything going by you because you've driven by it 400 times, and your Broca is saying, yeah, you don't need to pay attention to that sign. Don't need to pay attention to that sign. Don't need to pay attention to that off ramp. Don't need to pay. Have you ever noticed you didn't even think for 30 minutes and you took the right exit? because your broker is telling you, forget all those, forget all those. This is the one. And you go, and you're thinking about what's going on at work or the next vacation you're going to take or whatever. But if something breaks that, let's say you've driven this road, 400 times, and all of a sudden there's a giant brass statue in the middle of the field right off the thing. Your broker says, new thing. And you go, brass statue? That's weird. When did they put that brass statue up there? That's what's happening to your listeners. If they ever get to the point where they go, yeah, I don't need to keep listening because this is just sort of the same old stuff, and it's all one emotion, it's all one tone, and your broker says, yeah, it's going to be this emotion, it's going to be this tone for the rest of the time. But if all of a sudden you're laughing and the next minute you're going, oh, your broker's going, you got to pay attention because the mood just changed.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention because a bunch of people just clapped. What are they clapping about? 2 minutes ago, you were crying. Now everybody's clapping. And so your brain is constantly being changed and engaged, which is why you constantly want to be ramping those. And I would say specifically, you want poignant points to come right after they laugh. And I'll tell you why, because laughing opens you up both literally and physically. And if you go watch my speeches, you will see that they are crafted to make people laugh and then insert this little knife inside of them. And here, when you laugh, you literally and figuratively open up. You literally open up, right? Oh, that's so funny. But you also, your defenses come down and you listen. I'll give you an example of how I do this in my keynote. I talk about how my daughter at 14 was making $75 a day in tips. She started out making like, $10 and $25 and $50 and $75. So I'm telling the story. She starts bringing home $75 a day. She's 14 years old. She's carrying around big wads of cash like Tony Montana. And so I call her into my office and I go, so Hannah, you're just selling coffee up there, right? And of course, everybody laughs because I'm suggesting she might be selling drugs up there or something like that. And then she says, oh, yeah, Dad, I finally figured people out. I said, you finally figured people out? It took you to 14. That's a little long to take to figure people out. But okay, Dalai Lama, give me what's the meaning of life? She says, Dad, you know what I figured out? I figured out that people like to talk about themselves. And I go, well, what are you talking about? She goes, well, I used to just take their money, make their drink, never talk to them, give them their cash, and then they tip me a little bit. She said, but now all I do the entire time I'm making their coffee is I ask them questions about themselves. How long have you worked at your job? What kind of job do you have? What's the name of the company? What kind of degree did you need to get there? How long you been married? How many kids do you got? How was little Johnny's t-ball game? How was little Susie's softball game? Blah, blah, blah. She said, they used to give me the money. I'd give them their change, and some of the change would go in the tip jar. But now that I talk to them and ask them questions, now they give me the money, I give them the change, and all the change goes in the tip jar. So then I say this. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of sick. Here's a 14-year-old girl just learned how to manipulate 45-year-old men for money. And of course, everybody starts to laugh. And what I do is I've opened them up with a couple little funny stories. Now they're open and they're laughing. And I go, but there's a deep spiritual truth there. This 14-year-old girl unwittingly realized a key secret of life, that people want to be cared for. And when you care for them, even at a subconscious level, they're going to reciprocate and give you more money in the tip jar. What it means is nobody cares for people. So we need to come in and be the ones who care for people. And when you care for people respond, and it creates loyalty and, all those kinds of things. And so I make them laugh and then I insert a point. And I think that that's really key. If you really want somebody to get a really poignant point, make them laugh right beforehand, because now everything drops and their body language opens up and everything.
Man, you're spot on. You're spot on. We're doing a laughter yoga session on the 19th at a local event here in town, and that's one of the things that they taught us in our certification was when you laugh. Number one, you start to intake more air because we're shallow breathers by nature. So you start to exhale some of the stale air. You start to inhale some of the good air, and some of that air goes up into your brain, really kind of opening up all your neurons and all your stuff that's up there firing around, and those receptors are now open to receive that new information. And I've never heard it that way, so thank you, because you open them up and now you hit them with that knife you called it, that point that you're going to be sharing with them, and they retain it a lot more. Man, that is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of the reasons Zig was so effective. He had people laughing, but then he would also teach them all these lessons.
Yeah, spot on. Spot on. Awesome. Well, man, I know we've taken up a little bit of time. I do want to get one more thing out of you, if possible, because this whole public speaking workshop that we're doing, that's exactly why we launched the Christian Entrepreneurs Public Speaking Workshop, is to help people that gain that clarity and the confidence and that kingdom communication skills to be able to share their story and build a business that makes a difference. Chris, with on your final words of encouragement or endorsement would mean the world to me. I tell the childlike faith cool kids here that I want them to be so full of that childlike faith that they're going to be able to storm the gates of hell with a half-loaded water pistol. What could you share in the final moments that we have on this episode?
In regard to just anything or
Just
something
just
specific?
just public speaking, just getting out there, letting their voice be heard. And you've touched on several little things. What I'm kind of thinking about is that Angel Inside. That book was the first one that I read from you. You've got over 25 books, but there was something about the way you wrote that story. About you were able to follow it along with the timeline, the story built into it, and everybody has that angel inside, right? And so, just kind of maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in regard to speaking is understanding that the world needs to hear your voice. Now, not everybody's going to achieve Zig Ziglar or Tony Robbins kind of level or those kinds of things. In fact, it's one of the things that really angers me about a lot of these coaches out there who are like, come pay me $5,000 and I'll teach you how to make $25,000 a speech. You're never 99% of you are never going to get paid 25,000, and that's okay. You can make it. I mean, heck, if you're making $4,000 a speech and you do 3 or 4 a month, you're better than 99% of Americans financially, right? Sometimes you get in the public speaking world and you see people getting paid these outrageous sums, and you're like, I'm a failure. You're not a failure. In the top 1% of the entire world in income, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to just say, hey, God's given me a lane, God's given me a gift, God's given me wisdom, God's given me a passion for particular things. So finding your passion about something and cultivating your expertise in that, and then finding how it matches the market. So if you say, I just love to crochet, okay, and I'm a world-class crocheter. I've crocheted 500 Afghans and 372 doilies in my life. Okay. And I taught a bunch of little old ladies in the basement how to crochet. Okay. That's fantastic. Not a huge crochet market for speakers. So don't expect go pay somebody $5,000 and you're going to go on the crochet speaker market for $25,000 a pop. It's never going to happen. In fact, I always say I should have called myself a futurist, because who gets paid the most money per hour? Futurists. I've known guys making $50,000 a year for the last 20 years, $50,000 a speech for the last 20 years, because they're a futurist, because they sell to companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Starbucks. And they're like, well, if we'll pay this guy $50,000, because if he can tell us something that saves us $100 million, he's worth the $50,000. And so, understanding where you're going to fit in the marketplace, understanding who your competition is. And then I would say, I always recommend this book. Every single time people ask me, they call me up, would you coach me in speaking? Yes, I have a program, blah, blah, blah. But before we talk again, you need to go read this book. The book is called Repositioning. And Repositioning is written by Jack Trout. And it's an updated version of the original book called Positioning. And Positioning was written by Jack Trout and a guy named Al Reese. And it's about positioning yourself in the marketplace. In the marketplace. How do you fit? You want to create a category in which you are at the top of mind for people. And in that, according to that book, I'll give you a good example. If I said to you, who's the greatest, most successful current living megastar motivational speaker, everybody's going to say Tony Robbins because he is. He's the most famous. He's the most successful. He's the most well-known. He's the richest. He's made billions in his investments. But if I change the category and I say, who's the greatest living Black motivational speaker? Nobody will say Tony Robbins. They will all say Les Brown. But then if I change the category and say, who's the greatest, biggest, most successful Black female motivational speaker, they will say neither Tony Robbins nor Les Brown. There's somebody else. So when somebody says, who's the greatest leadership speaker in the world right now? Most people are going to say John Maxwell. That's the position that he holds in the mind of the market. So I never tried to compete with John. I mean, I started out ghostwriting for John, but I continued to niche down. And as I niched down to a smaller topic, my fee went up, my coaching fees went up. And so, my general topic is influence, but probably the best-selling author in the area of influence. I wrote a book called The Art of Influence. This guy, Robert Cialdini, he's a professor at ASU. He wrote a book called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. I believe it's one of the 10 best business books ever written. He would hold the influence spot. I would probably be number 2 in regard to the topic of influence. But what I talk about that's different than what Robert talks about is his all sort of science-based and that kind of stuff. Mine is the art of influence, and it's about character-based influence. I don't teach people skill sets to go and influence people, like how to handle objections, how to make arguments, how to make a presentation. I teach people the character that we develop in ourselves that allow us to gain influence in the lives of other people. Things like integrity and service and optimism and all of those kinds of things. So I just think it's important to understand who you are and how you go to market and where you fit in that market. It's why nobody should ever call themselves a motivational speaker, because there's 50,000 of them.
Yeah.
Now, if you're the guy who's missing one arm because you chopped it off when you got caught in the rocks when you were out walking, now everybody knows exactly who you are. Not because you're a great motivational, it's because you're the only guy who chopped his own arm off. You know who I'm talking about, right? That guy who got caught and they made a movie out of him and whatever. In fact, when that story came out, I texted a friend. I said, more competition. This guy's going to be on the speaking circuit. And that's exactly what he did, because he was able to take that category and make it his. And the guy's been making 25 grand a speech for 20 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this. Hey, I feel like a preacher almost. In your final closing, how can these people connect? How can the cool kids connect with you and follow you and get some of the resources that you have to offer? How can they
absolutely.
find you?
Yeah, go to chriswidnercoaching.com if you think there might be a way that we could help. I have 3, 6, and 12-month programs that I work with people. It's holistic. It's about how to tie all these things together: faith, business, relationships, marriage, your health, your money, your finances, your mindset, those kinds of things. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Send a connection request to me. I take all connection requests except for social media people in foreign countries, because all they're trying to do is sell me a social media package. But no, if I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I do a daily show every day at noon called Revive Your Life, where I talk about a different topic and how we can revive our life each day. So connect with me on LinkedIn, Chris Widner, and jump on over to Chris Widner Coaching. You can certainly go to Amazon and see all the books and audio programs and that kind of stuff as well.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for pouring so many golden nuggets. I mean, the Cool Kids Club is definitely better because of it. And Cool Kids, if you gain just one nugget, I want you to just put down in the comment section the little fire emoji, because this was on point. This was, again, we're going to storm the gates of hell with the half-loaded water pistol. And seriously, if you're watching and you're thinking, hey, how can I take the first step? I want to go ahead and invite you guys, right, to not just be inspired by this, but be activated. I want you to DM me the word speak if you want to sign up for our Christian Entrepreneurs Public Speaking Workshop coming up. April 26th is going to be a half-day workshop. It's going to have breakfast included. It's going to have a working lunch. You're going to be able to walk away with your 30, 60, 90-second elevator pitch to be able to confidently tell the marketplace exactly who you serve, what you do, and why you do it. And I'm telling you, you're just at the beginning stages, and literally everything that Chris was talking about is just within grasp. So it's going to be a learning process because it's going to be something new. But Chris, again, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate you, man. I cannot wait to see what happens down the road, not just with your coaching, but I want to see some of these cool kids take action, because without action, none of it works, right?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. If there's any way we could ever do anything together, you just let me know.
Absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
brother.
Hey, y'all have a good one.
You too. Take care.
We'll see
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Bye-bye. Guys, how cool was that? How awesome. I cannot thank you guys enough for hanging out with me. We had a little technical glitch. Not sure what happened. I'll go ahead and post and merge these two together for you guys so that we can watch the whole episode. I'm not sure how to do that, but I'll figure it out. That's just part of life. Sometimes things happen. You just kind of have to roll with it. Now, wasn't really bothered by it. I just messaged Chris. I said, hey, hang tight. We're going to jump back on and we're going to finish this episode out. All right, guys. So, hey, this has been a little different, but I loved having Chris on here, and we're already gearing up. We already have our second guest, and you're not going to believe the second guest. I mean, he has talked to people like Earl Nightingale was one of his, worked for him. Napoleon Hill he was the last guy mentored by Napoleon Hill. If you've ever read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, this guy is coming up next, guys. So be ready. He's going to be with us on Faith Your Fears Friday next Friday. So, hey, hang tight, guys. Be with us. Love you. Appreciate you. Adios.